You know what sucks is that while I was busy having the worst day of my life, they recorded Bonk Bros without me this week. So
Ooh.
Which was probably in my favor because then I could like defend myself without having to argue against Dylan. So the whole podcast was me convincing everybody how I was faster than Dylan at the Big Sugar, but he wasn't there to argue. So it's
I
like
haven't listened to the episode yet. Was anybody convinced that you were faster than me at Big Sugar?
everybody was convinced.
Okay. Okay.
What were your placings ultimately? What were you, Dylan, and what were you, Drew?
I got 18th.
I was 24th.
24th. And Drew, how far into the race were you when you wrecked?
Dropped my chain 8 miles in, chased back in, and was in the group for all of like a half a mile, and then I crashed.
Yeah,
but within that half a mile, I did pass Dylan, so it says a lot.
Yeah, I saw that in the video, and I know I messaged both of you guys separately, but after my experience at BWR Kansas and then watching a lot of point of view footage from Big Sugar, I've come to this conclusion that in gravel races that have frequent turns, it's actually not possible to control your bike, and that all you're doing is drifting if you're moving at a high enough rate of speed.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, I know you guys have talked a lot about tires, but I mean, do you feel like side knobs even do anything?
Yeah, that's a great question.
I don't know. No comment.
I spend far less time thinking about knobs of tires than I do the casing of the tire, which is
Right.
for the most part what determines the rolling resistance and the puncture resistance.
Yeah.
Although I think the knobs can help with the puncture resistance too. But I mean, you make a great point. When the gravel is that chunky and loose, it almost seems like the knobs are irrelevant.
Yeah, I mean, I had an experience in the group that I was in for most of the last 4 hours of the BWR Kansas, and I did the wafer or thin mint version of the event. But yeah, like we had some people in my group that went into a downhill turn too hot, and it was like one of those marbles over hard pack situations, and it was like the scene in Return of the Jedi where the stormtroopers are on those like air speeder things in the forest on Endor and just like start flying into trees.
Yeah.
So people just started flying off the road into ditches, and you know, it just seems like an inevitability once you pass a certain speed limit and lean angle on your bicycle when you're riding on marbles.
Yeah, Drew learned all about that, didn't he?
The side knobs felt pretty irrelevant as I was coming to a drifting stop on the side of the road on the ground. Yep. I think the most frustrating thing about the crash was that like I would have popped right back up and would have had to chase again, but like I would have been able to catch right back up had I noticed that there were just rocks jammed in my shifter. I'm like, because my back wheel wouldn't spin. And I'm like, what is wrong with my bike? And nothing looked wrong with it. And it was literally just rocks were jammed into my shifter. And so my brake lever was being closed. So like my brakes were being activated.
Yeah.
And all it was because of rocks. I was like, literally, it took me 2 seconds to flick out the rocks. I was like, man, if I had noticed that 2 or 3 minutes sooner, like, it would have been game on. But
yeah, I mean, Drew, I know that you're a weekly church attendee, and it seems to me that something like that, maybe later in life, if you go down the path of preaching, that could become a parable that you could share with people. Yeah, the parable of the rocks and the shifter, right? You know, sometimes your wheel won't turn and you don't know why, and you look for everything, but actually it's just a couple of rocks stuck in your shifter.
Like a metaphor for life.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, it sounds like the headline here is that Dylan, you've had the worst week of your life. So what happened?
Actually, the morning of Big Sugar, I had a sore throat, and
he was making excuses before the race even started.
I know.
Should have put it on social media.
It wasn't a bad sore throat. I could just, and I wasn't about to not do the race, so I did the race. And to be honest, after the race, I didn't have a sore throat. Like the race cleared it. At least at the time, I was like, I guess the race cleared it up. It's pretty dumb.
I could tell you were worried about it that morning, and I was like, I'm not going to say anything. I was like, I wasn't, because I could already tell you were brewing on it, and I was like, I'm not going to say anything because I don't want it to like get in your head or anything. So I just didn't say anything. I just dropped it.
Yeah, but then that night, I woke up with a terrible sore throat, got terrible sleep. My Whoop score was 1%. I don't know how often you've seen a 1% Whoop score, but
was that because of the sore throat or because of the race?
I mean, probably a lot of things. So yeah, and then we drove home, and the sore throat just got worse and worse, and it came with a fever and a headache, and it got so bad that on Tuesday, or Monday, was it Monday or I can't. I've been to the ER 3 times this week. I can't remember the first time. So
Whoa.
I went to the ER. They tested me for COVID, flu, strep. Was none of those. The doctor was like, "Oh well, it's probably the common cold or whatever." So I don't go to the doctor for the common cold, but regardless, so I went back home. Got way worse. Wednesday, I went to the ER in the morning again, and I was like, this pain is unbearable. I have to do something. They gave me some painkillers. Again, none of the tests they did came back positive. So they gave me some painkillers. I took the painkillers, and the pain was getting worse throughout the day. And by Wednesday afternoon, I mean, I can't remember a time in my life where I've been in worse pain. I can't remember. I'm sure this happened when I was a small child. Like I skinned my knee and I was crying because I skinned my knee when I was 4 years old, probably. But I can't remember a time in my life where I was crying because of physical pain ever. And I was in tears. It hurt so bad. I couldn't eat anything. I didn't eat anything for 24 hours because my throat hurt so bad. It was painful to drink water. It was painful to swallow. I had to just spit my saliva out instead of swallowing it. And I just went to a different ER. Like the ER where I live in Brevard is not that great apparently. So I went to the next ER, which is Hendersonville, which was a lot better. The doctor there was a lot more competent. I got a CAT scan of my throat, and they found that there was an abscess back there. And
Whoa.
The abscess was full of pus, and the doctor had to stick a needle down my throat and drain the abscess with the needle, which was pretty instant relief when he did that. Like he put numbing cream in there, but I could feel that my throat was more opened up after he did that. And obviously I was on a bunch of painkillers, so and now I'm on antibiotics, so I feel a lot better. I can still feel my throat, and it doesn't feel great, but I feel way better than I did on Wednesday.
We had the luxury of getting a picture of the pus in a vial that day.
I did just post the picture on Instagram, so now everybody has that luxury.
Oh, good. We had the early subscription. Nice.
What do you believe to be the cause of the abscess? Did you get a fruity pebble stuck back there?
I don't know. I asked the doctor what causes abscesses in people's throats, and his answer was, why do I have a mole on my arm? So
yeah,
I don't know.
That's a good answer.
I really don't know.
Wow.
But it's it seems like it's fairly rare, a rare occurrence. So hopefully it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, I would hope so as well. So I have to ask, I mean, you guys talked a little bit about the morning of the race. Dillman, you woke up, you had the sore throat, you weren't feeling 100%. Clearly, this is a very important race. I mean, I know both you guys have large social media followings. You're putting out content. Drew, you're trying to get one of those now 30 slots in the Lifetime Grand Prix next year, which I want to talk about, this reduction in slots, which is interesting. But given that, with kind of so much on the line, when you wake up on race day and you're not feeling 100%, how do you mentally manage that?
Other than my throat, which I will say that on race morning, it didn't feel that bad. On race morning, it just felt like maybe I was starting to get sick, which is obviously not ideal, but I will say that my legs felt great and the rest of my body felt great, and I was mentally prepared to race. So I wasn't really in a bad headspace, I don't think. And I think I've, as I've raced more and more throughout my career, I've kind of been good at dealing with setbacks in races, like a flat tire or cramping or bonking or whatever. I don't get super worked up about that. I can't remember a time in my life where I've raced while I was sick, to be honest with you, but I just kind of tried to think of it as another, getting a flat tire out there, which a lot of people were going to have to deal with. Big Sugar is a flat tire heavy course. So,
wasn't Logan Owens sick and he didn't race? And because he didn't race the final event, he wasn't even in the final standings. So like, if you want to be in the final standings for the Lifetime Grand Prix, you have to start the last race. Like, no matter how. I think Payson was sick last year and he started. Like, it's a bummer, but that's kind
Big
of the
Sugar
rule,
is the mandatory race for the Lifetime Grand Prix.
Yeah, have to get that parade in for the.
You have to start, but you don't have to. Do you have to finish if you DNF?
No, you don't have to finish. Like, for example, Matt Beers didn't finish because he crashed. Right. And I don't know if he broke his collarbone or dislocated his shoulder, something like that, and he didn't finish. He got 0 points for the race, but he still was in the standings.
Got it.
And with Big Sugar, having consumed at this point, I think most of the content that's been created about the event. So yeah, it's the final race in the Lifetime Grand Prix series for people who have already you can drop 2 races.
Yeah, there's 7 races total.
How many was it?
2 drop races, so 5 count.
Yeah. So for the Lifetime athletes, it's a chance to move up in the overall rankings if it's one of the races you're not going to drop. And of course, there's a lot on the line in terms of getting into the series next year. Probably helps with sponsors, I would imagine, if you get a great placing at this event. From what I gathered, this seems like a very dangerous event. And I didn't really get that vibe last year, but I don't know if that's just because there's much more content being made this year. And it just seemed like much more ferocious level of competition and battle for positioning in the pack from what I observed. But again, there just wasn't that much content put out about the race last year.
Well, what I'll say is that if you are just riding the Big Sugar gravel by yourself on a pre-ride or just an endurance ride by yourself out there for some reason, it's not that dangerous. It's really, it's fine. It's when you put 50 really fast, really aggressive racers all in a pack together, bunched in close proximity, that it starts getting dangerous, because the gravel roads are pretty narrow and there's a lot of dust being kicked up and you're trying to follow wheels so you can't see what you're hitting, and it's very loose and it's very chunky, and flat tires were happening right and left, crashes were happening right and left. I think it's the combination of being on these particular gravel roads and racing at the elite level. I think from footage that I've seen from even some of the age group pack riders, the speeds aren't as high and the following distance isn't as close, and it's probably safer. But I don't know. When I was descending out there, it was quite scary. Probably the scariest gravel race I've done.
And Drew, you're coming from, the world of criterium racing, where people routinely put other people under the curb where they could have actual life-threatening injuries. How did it feel for you to be in the mix at this race compared to some of the things you've done in the world of criterium racing, which, on its face is just an incredibly dangerous
relative to
discipline?
That, considering that the last crit I did, I broke my wrist in, it doesn't compare. Crit racing is way worse.
Yeah.
Like, in gravel racing, people freak out if you touch them through one turn. In crit racing, people are touching you through every turn. And it's just, and the speeds are higher. I feel like the consequences are higher, like when you crash, like what you said, because the speeds are higher. It's all paved. But, and to be quite frank, on my YouTube video, my strategy was clickbait. So like I put on there too sketchy. That was mainly to get people to watch it. And like Dillon influenced me. If you read it, like if you read Dillon's race report, I think it was on Strava or something. He said that it felt pretty dangerous. But I wasn't in that lead group. I was pretty much like, I got to see the road. Like for 90 miles, I got to see the road. You know what I mean? And so I felt like I had a pretty good control on like, you know, I could totally see where if you're in the group and you're a little bit more blind on some of those descents, it would make it way more scary. But I had the luxury of like on most of the descents, I was by myself, so I could see everything.
So Drew, this is a point that I wanted to bring up on Bonk Bros, but I obviously didn't make it on this week. I'm actually very impressed with how the challenge extra protection tires did. It seems like every rider that ran those challenge tires, and I can think of 3 of them, you being one, did not flat. So it's a testament to those tires might actually
I'm going to clip this, and this is going to be the highlight right here.
So it seems like those new XP, the challenge tires that don't have the extra protection for sure flat really easily, and I don't think you would have made it through I don't even know if you would have been able to finish on those tires, to be honest with you. They're so fragile. Right. But it seems like these new XP tires, at least at Big Sugar, they pulled through with the not flatting, and you know, being that they're challenge tires, they're probably pretty quick too. I will say that you crashing out of the front group at mile 10 and then having to solo for 90 miles probably increased your odds of not flatting. Like had you stayed with the front group, there's a much higher chance that you would have had a flat out there.
Yeah, I agree. Yep.
And for people listening who have not, you know, been at the sharp end of an elite gravel race, Dillon, is that just because you have such tight proximity to the people around?
Exactly. You're trying to follow wheels, and it was also very dusty, which means you couldn't really see it. All you could see in front of you during a lot of sections was just the rider's butt in front of you. You couldn't even see the ground. It was so dusty. And there's potholes out there. There's sharp rocks. I mean, you are just hitting stuff absolutely blindly. And that's where most of the flat tires come from.
Yeah, and there was a helicopter out there this year filming the entire race, I think. I don't know if you've been in a race before where there's been a helicopter the entire
time. Yeah, Leadville, there was a helicopter.
Well, right?
I think at Laruta, when I did Laruta, there was a helicopter. But yeah, it seemed like it was more noticeable during this race because I felt like I heard the helicopter the whole time. It was like, yeah, the helicopter's right there. Whereas at Leadville, the helicopter must have been high enough up in the air that I didn't even really notice it, to be honest.
Were you getting any downdraft from the helicopter at all that it influenced?
I don't know. It's hard to say. There is a pretty significant amount of tree cover for a lot of the course, which is probably why the helicopter had to be lower. And there was already so much chaos going on the ground that it was kind of hard to say whether there was any influence from the helicopter.
Yeah, and I know you guys have both raced in the Midwest quite a bit. I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri, so I've spent a lot of time being out in the wind. I have to say, Drew, the wind that we had at BWR Kansas was more than I think I've experienced previously in the Midwest. And, you know, during the times I've done the Unbound 100, I don't feel like the wind was that strong. Did that jump out at you, or were you just like, yeah, whatever?
Yeah, I think I was more in the line of, yeah, whatever. I think in a race like that, and because I was in the lead group, there's like, you're thinking the whole race. Like I was constantly thinking about, what do I do? Who do I follow? Where do I need to be in the group? Am I eating enough? Like your brain is constantly going. And so when I think of the race, I remember the wind on the, really bad on that last, the levee. Cause it was like, you were going straight into it and I was chasing people down. So like at that point I was solo and was like, oh yeah, this sucks.
It also was a time of year when all the crops had been harvested. Just going out and riding around in Lawrence the day or two before the race, there was maybe one or two fields that still had crops. And I mean, it's noticeably different when you have, I don't know what the crop was. It wasn't corn, but it was something that was tall. And then you get past that and it's just, you're like almost getting blown off your bike. And there were so many directional changes in that race. You were always getting hit, from some angle. And for me, not having raced and win that strong in quite a long time, the thing that I knew would happen, but I found to be most surprising, was when we turned the corner and would get the tailwind, because the first few people can just take off, and then it's like there's no relief. You then have to ride even harder in the tailwind to stay with the group.
Yeah.
Which is super fun.
Did you have to like climb through that stopped train?
Yeah.
There was a stopped train.
Did I have to what? Oh, no. The train was not on the tracks when I got there. No, the group that was right in front of me had to go through it, though.
Yeah, I rolled up to it and was like...
Did you?
I immediately turned my GoPro on because I was like, oh, this is the footage. And luckily there were some people there from the amateur group or from the shorter races that like I was able to just jump right off and hand them my bike and leapt over. And then at that point, Roberge and Finn Gullikson had just been like sitting on my wheel for like 5 miles. And I was like, are these guys going to sprint me at the end? Because this is ridiculous. And so then as soon as I got through the train tracks, I just attacked and left. I didn't like attack, but I was like, I'm not waiting for these guys. Like at that point I was in chase mode and was like, I need to catch people. Because I still felt pretty good. But
how close is this to the finish?
Oh, like a couple miles. It was probably 2 miles before you turn on the last levee, and then you're on the levee for like 5 miles, and then you hit that last 10 miles of single track. But once you get into the single track, it's like that's like pretty much the finishing straight. It's 10 miles of single track, but you're so close to the finish that like it feels like once you enter the single track, that's like kind of the finish.
Gotcha.
Yeah, the single track, I mean, it had a speed limit, and then there were those multiple sections of extremely deep sand. But other than that, I felt like once you were in there, you're going to go the speed limit, and there wasn't like a big chance to move up. So for both of you guys, when you look back at kind of the trajectory of this entire season, and Drew, if you set aside the broken wrist and Dylan maybe having this abscess, which sounds horrific, what was your worst day on the bike at a race this year, and what happened?
The day I broke my wrist.
No, we have to take that. We're taking that off the table.
Seriously,
That's
I only
a bad
raced
day,
I think I only raced like less than 15 times if you add them all up because of the broken wrist. I don't know. Dylan, you go first.
I didn't really have. I can't really think of a bad day on the bike this year. My worst Grand Prix result was Sea Otter, but it wasn't really a bad day. I made a really bad tactical error at the beginning. People who probably watched some sort of footage from the race, if footage from the race exists, probably think I was trying to attack off the front in the first mile, which wasn't the case. I just thought everybody was going to go as hard as they could into the single track like they did the year previously, but I was wrong about that. And then right before we hit the single track, because I had been off the front for 45 seconds, about 40 guys passed me, and I was in pretty bad position. I think I ended up finishing 30th in that race, which, again, was my worst Grand Prix result of the year. I wouldn't even call that a bad day on the bike. I've had much, much worse days on the bike. So it's all in all, it's been a good year. I can't think of a terrible day on the bike this year.
Yeah, I can't think of a bad day either. Like the worst that I can think of is BWR Utah, because it was at a little bit of elevation and it was my first race back from the broken wrist. So I was still building fitness, but that's not like a mental, that was just fitness. You know what I mean? Like, I've felt like I've made a lot of tactical errors, like Dillman was saying, where like at BWR California, I think I had good legs, but I made such a bad decision at the beginning of the race that it affected the rest of the race. And I feel like I've done that a lot, like early in these races. I'm very not very confident in my long endurance fitness. So like at BWR California, at Gravel Nats, and at Big Sugar, but Big Sugar was because of a crash. But at those two races, at Gravel Nats and BWR California, I made like early decisions to not burn too many matches. And then the rest of the race, I'm like not with the leaders. And that's like a lack of confidence in my own abilities. And I need to like, so at Big Sugar, I was like, you know what? I'm racing at the front. I'm not leaving this front group. I don't care how hard we go. I'm burning the matches to stay in that lead group. But then I crashed. So yeah. And I felt like BWR Kansas was like a real kind of like eye opener for myself, just because it was very reassuring to know I can race at the front the whole time and not blow up. And I just like I know that at the end of the race is when like you could lose a lot of positions, and having that knowledge, I'm like, I don't want to end up so deep in the tank that like 10 guys pass me in the last 10 miles. But that hasn't happened yet. So I feel like I just need to be a little bit more, I just need to trust my fitness a little bit more than what I do. But
You've got to trust the force. I wanted to go back to the train thing for a moment. And for anyone who's listening hasn't seen Drew's video yet or isn't aware of what happened at BWR Kansas, it's one of the major gravel races on the calendar. And yeah, in like the last 15, 20 miles of the race, riders encountered a very active freight train line. I believe it's a Union Pacific line. And there was a stopped freight train. Freight trains can be up to a mile long. If you're not not from an area with trains and don't know how this works, once a freight train starts to go by, you might be waiting there for 5 or 6 minutes if it's a mile-long train, depending on how fast it's traveling. This train, for some reason, was stopped on the tracks at the crossing when the pro field rolled up, and they made the decision to cross through the train because I think there were
people crossing it when I got there. So, right? And there was a race promoter right there.
Yeah.
And I was like, is this the right way? And he's like, yeah, we're trying to get it moved. And I was like, all right, like whatever.
But again, if you're listening, you should never do this. This is an incredibly dangerous thing to do, and you can die.
Very dangerous
if a freight train,
as we were doing it.
Yeah, right. And Drew, you were running
switched
road
to mountain bike
and
pedals because of all the wood sections in the middle.
Okay. Yeah, I was really curious when I watched your video because I knew a lot of, at least in the Wafer, most people were running road shoes and pedals, which I just never do anymore, given some of the experiences I've had with changes in weather at events. And, but yeah, nonetheless, whatever shoes you might be wearing, crossing an active freight train line while a train is stopped is a bad idea. And if the train moves,
so
you're not going to have a good
covering
day.
His bases so we don't get sued. That's what it sounds like. Maybe I should put a disclaimer in my YouTube
not at
video.
all. It's just well, I've actually been thinking about this a lot. I want to talk a little bit about the design of the Lifetime Grand Prix series, and I've been talking to some people from that team. I actually want to get some people from Lifetime.
Should have got them on today so that we could
convince
them to get me in. I tried slipping the main guy at 20 at the rave.
That'd be pretty interesting.
But he said he wasn't the guy that selected. And I was like, who do I give this $20 bill to so I can get in?
That's what he tells everybody.
Yeah, more than $20.
You have to know the magic words.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I want to come back to that in a minute, but I'm curious. I mean, Drew, I know you're relatively new to gravel. Dylan, you know, you're like you're the godfather of gravel at this point. But you know, just as an amateur participant, I've been going to gravel events now for, I think, more than a decade probably. And as participation has increased and also the level of competition has become noticeably stiffer, even in my field at a relatively low level, I was like, this has gotten a lot more, it's gotten a lot more serious than it was a decade ago for sure. And that's cool. I think that's part of what makes it really fun, is getting to experience the race dynamics that you're reading about or seeing professional riders doing when you're an amateur. I think that's a super fun thing to do. And for people who are listening, if you just ride recreationally, I recommend trying a race because number one, it's super fun. Number two, you're going to learn something about yourself. Number three, I think the process of training for and competing in an event really can unlock just things about yourself that you might not know. And it's a very satisfying process because unlike almost everything else in life, if you follow in a solid endurance training program, you're going to actually get better. And you can say that about very few things in life. But something that I've noticed is, man, we're paying a lot of money at this point to do these events. And I don't know, I'm assuming entries are comp for you guys in most of these bigger events. But as an amateur, you're paying a couple $100 to go do an event. You're traveling, you know, you're taking time away from your family and your job. And then you show up, and it's kind of genius because, yes, the promoters are doing a lot in terms of, you know, doing some kind of a minimal level of safety, I would say. But you're out there on a course where cars are driving around. They're coming in and out of groups of riders. You're running into trains. And it just seems to me that as the competition increases and you're putting more people out on the road, it does feel like it's getting more and more dangerous. And I don't know what the experience has been like for you guys because, you know, professional bike racing is an inherently incredibly dangerous pursuit. At the same time, I don't know, like you come around a corner and a Ram 1500 is driving right at you. That's a different kind of risk than I'm going to go into a corner too hot. So yeah, I'm just curious, as the level of competition has increased, you're going faster. When you have those kinds of variables out on the course, does it feel like it's getting more dangerous to you all, or is it just kind of the status quo that you've always experienced?
I think that the heightened level of competition does bring more danger to it. I think, Drew, did you catch it on video, that Jeep that was in the middle of the field at the beginning of the race? We're talking about, this is when the front group was probably still the entire 70 rider pro field was coming around a corner, and there was a Jeep there. It was actually pretty miraculous that no one hit that Jeep, in my opinion. I don't know if we're coming to the point where these roads need to be closed for these races instead of open, because we're talking about roads that they're gravel roads, so by definition, there's not going to be a lot of traffic on them. But all it takes is one car, right? Yeah. It takes one car to kill someone. It doesn't have to be a heavily trafficked road. And there are some cases like BWR California where you're actually racing on roads that have quite a bit of traffic. It's not one car, it's quite a few cars. So yeah, I mean, I think that this is a discussion that's kind of been lurking in the background of gravel as it's gotten more and more popular about whether or not closed roads need to be a thing, better safety precautions need to be a thing. I think it's highly dependent on the race. There's some races that actually do a good job with it, and then there are some races where I get done with the race and I think that is the sketchiest thing I've ever done. So yeah,
I mean, I was at a race earlier in the year, Rasputica in Vermont. Great race, great promoters, and we had a rider get killed. I don't know the exact details, but from what I gathered from the police report, I think the rider came off of a gravel section, I think into a sweeping turn onto a paved road and crossed the center line because, they probably went into the apex of the turn, exited wide, and had a head on,
Yeah.
I believe, with the Ram 1500 and died. Which is tragic. It's awful. But when you're mixing people that want to get a great result in their amateur cycling event with traffic on an open road, I don't know, just having somebody standing there in an orange vest who's not an actual law enforcement officer may not be sufficient to have a safe event. And there's personal responsibility involved, of course, if people are crossing the center line.
Yeah, I was going to say that there's some things that are like within the promoter's control and a lot of things that aren't. And I think, the things that are kind of out of their control, like controlling where the riders go, there's only so much they can do there. But there are a lot of things that I think are within the control of a promoter, like rerouting. If like, for example, at the Mid-South, you go through downtown Stillwater to get to the finish line, and there's probably 5 stoplights that you have to hit. And the last time I did it, I wasn't able to do it this year, but when I did it in 2022, I was doing the double. So like every second counted, and I ran a red light. And if I hadn't done that, I would have lost. I won by 9 seconds. And so had I stopped at that red light, I would have lost the race. So like they need to consider that. And I think they either need to have police people there to like stop the traffic so riders can go through, or they just need to reroute it so that that doesn't happen. And that's totally within the control of the promoter. And I think that that's, at least for that race, I think they're making a bad call with the way they're routing it. And that's, that's something that could be changed and made safer on behalf of the promoter. But like random cars coming around turns and stuff, like, yeah, that stuff is dangerous. But, I feel like the argument can be made like 10 years ago, this stuff was just as dangerous. There's just more people now, and it's more covered, like people with cameras on their bikes. So I don't know about all that stuff, but
I don't know if you've talked about the Unbound Mud situation on this podcast from this year, where the mud was so horrendous. It's not necessarily a safety concern, but what it is a concern for, at least what a lot of people brought up, is that, as you were saying, amateurs are spending a lot of money to come to the race, traveling really far, taking time off of work, taking time from their family, and then they come to Unbound and they get 11 miles in and their bike explodes from catastrophic thick Kansas mud, and they got 11 miles into a race that was supposed to be 200 miles for them. And we talked about the Unbound Mud situation so much on Bonk Bros when it happened, but I think that the more, and I could see both sides of the argument when it first happened. There were a lot of people making the argument, well, this is gravel racing. Part of gravel racing is sometimes you have to deal with adverse conditions, but I think the more that I think about it, I'm on the side of they probably should have rerouted that. They were already thinking about rerouting it on the starting line, and they just ended up not. But
yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. And the last time I did the Unbound 100, and I got second that year for the second time.
Wait, who'd you lose to? Stephen Hyde?
There was.
I was going to say that'd be rad.
I wish it was a little bit earlier than the arrival of Stephen Hyde, but the we had like the same mud scenario. So this was, I think, maybe the first time that it happened. It was in 2015, and it was the exact same thing. We got about, I don't know, 12, 15 miles into the race, and then we had one full hour of running in mud. That was ankle deep mud. It was the exact same thing. Bike packed up. You're like pushing a 40-pound bike for an hour. And you guys know how it is because you've done it. It's with the rolling terrain. At least the year that I did it, it was rollers for the entire hour that we were running. So you would keep thinking, like, man, when I get to the top of this hill, I'm finally going to be done pushing this effing bike that I've been pushing. And then you get to the top of the hill, and then you just see a series of rollers. And the way I characterized it, I did an episode about it with my buddy Blake, I got second, he got third. And it was like a battle scene in Game of Thrones, because we were doing the 100 and it was before the 100 and 200 split. I don't know how they run it now, but back then the 100 would start, I don't know, like 10 minutes after the full distance. So we basically were riding into the back of a field of like 1,000 people and then having to work our way through it until the race split. So we're like running with 1,000 people in this mud. And I'm you guys don't experience this, but an interesting aspect of the amateur experience, particularly for sprint distance gravel racers such as myself, is there's this bizarre dynamic of everybody's trying to figure out who in this group is in my distance, who is in my age group, people doing this weird calculus of whether they're going to pull or not or do any work based on who they think is actually in their field. And we had a really funny moment at BWR Kansas where I knew my buddy Spencer, who I host the Beyond the Peloton podcast with. I knew that Spencer was up the road and was in whatever the lead group was. I also know Spencer's a former professional, domestic pro cyclist, and he's incredibly fast. And the guys in my group, I could hear him talking like, I think there are only like 2 wafer riders in here. And then like we have this split and we have like a group of 15 people who are in the wafer, and they're still like, well, who's in what age group? I was like, hey, look, man, there are like 5 people up the road and they're at least 5 minutes in front of us. So nobody here is going to win the race, just so you know, unless somebody like starts working. But anyway, with the mud thing, I just had Joe DeSena, the founder of the Spartan Race, on the podcast. Just dropped that this week. We had a conversation about this, and it's been a question I've explored a lot on this podcast, which is, I think with endurance sports, what amateurs are looking for, they do want to have that experience, that growth experience of, I'm doing something that's demonstrably difficult. I've worked a long time to go to something like Unbound. And I think there is this question of, is it, when you introduce these variables that are highly unexpected, such as the mud, is it additive to the experience and actually pushing people into some new dimension of potential personal growth? Or is it just super annoying because you went to do a bike race, not push your bike around in the mud for an hour and a half, which is if you haven't trained for it, like if you don't run, you're going to have a bad day, right? Like most people training for a gravel race aren't training to push a 40-pound object
I think
for an
that
hour.
I think that I don't necessarily mind having to run when you didn't train for running. I think what I'm personally a little more peeved by with the mud is that gravel racing is already probably too much determined by people having mechanicals. It would kind of be nice if there were less mechanicals in gravel racing, so that the winner of Unbound wasn't determined by who didn't get a flat tire out there. Or the same.
I think about this with running.
Yeah.
In running, there's no mechanical errors. I mean, what happens unless your shoes like totally blow out, which that's the only variable in running are your shoes. If your shoes blow out, and even then you can keep running, but like
you could have body problems like
but that's any sport. I'm saying like think of all the variables in cycling. Like people have screwed up a BOA, and a BOA is so small. Think of all the other little things on your bike that could go wrong.
Exactly. Well, so that's the point I'm getting at. So gravel racing arguably might be the discipline of cycling that is the most influenced by mechanicals. And maybe that'll change over the years as gravel equipment gets better. But I think when you introduce that mud section, you're only increasing the chance that the race gets determined by mechanicals by an exponential amount.
I think the thing that upset me the most is like what you were talking about, Andrew, was like the additive or subtract, like that. A lot of people, their experience ended at mile 11 and they didn't get to do the other 190 miles that they signed up for because their bike blew up. And it was like, that's a bummer. People like traveled all the way out there, paid their money, trained their tails off, and then some mud rips their derailleur off and they don't even get to experience good or bad the rest of the race. Like that's what frustrates me is like so many people had to probably quit right there.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And there is a bigger existential question that I would love to hear from you guys about. And I think that there is this trend towards what I would call stunt courses, where we're going to add in something that's extra horrible to our course. That's, I don't know, it's an extra dimension of physical challenge for the rider, or it's something that if you're not prepared for it or don't manage it really carefully, you didn't bring a paint stick that day or a small flathead screwdriver, which is my favorite. Although I've been told not to carry one because it might puncture my lung or something. But hey, you know what? That's no risk, no champagne. You got to roll the dice in life. But what do you think about this trend towards, because as I see these stunt courses becoming more and more and more difficult, I just keep thinking, we're getting really close to this just being marathon mountain bike racing, and just bring your full suspension.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess that's the other side of the coin, right? That's kind of what I was saying. I think people that were pro mud section, which there were plenty of people that were pro mud section, and when right after the race, I was a little bit mixed on it. The argument is that, hey, this is what gravel racing is. Don't change gravel racing, change your approach to gravel racing. Don't make gravel racing more like road racing. Like, become a gravel racer and bring your paint stick and be ready for mud and be ready for terrible conditions. And I can see that argument. And to be honest, if for people that follow me and watch my YouTube channel, one of the things that I love about gravel racing and marathon mountain bike racing the most is probably being more prepared with my equipment than my competitors. I love that. I love when I have something on my bike that gives me an edge over everybody else who I'm racing with. And so I don't think I had that this year at Unbound. I think looking back on it, my bike setup was probably not appropriate for that mud. I think that if I could go back and do it again, I might have even just ridden my drop bar hardtail with normal gravel tires so that the mud clearance would have been, if the mud clearance on the bike was a lot better, perhaps I would have made that front group, and then it wouldn't have mattered that my bike was heavier or less aerodynamic, because I'm with the front group. So, but yeah, I think that those are all cool aspects of racing. And like I said, this is why I was kind of seeing both sides of it at first.
I really like the Belgian waffle ride races, at least the ones that I've done, because I think they do a good job at this. They don't just take something stupid and add it to the course, like a big mud section. They take sections that are like fun or require some bike handling, and they throw those sections into the race. Like BWR Kansas, there was that pretty much a backcountry wood section at mile 50, and it was like 5 or 6 miles long, and it was a little bumpy, but it required, like, you could immediately tell who were the roadies and who were the off roadies, like the cyclocross mountain bike guys. And being one of the off roadies coming from a cyclocross, mostly a cyclocross background, I love those sections because, like, that's the skill set that I have. So, like, I can put time into people there, and it creates a dynamic of, like, skills that are required. Like, riding through mud is not a skill. It's like,
well, I will say it could be a skill if it's typical cyclocross mud. That for sure requires skill.
Yeah, right.
The mud at Unbound, I saw some people commenting on this when there was like a video of Keegan Swenson riding through the mud, and there were some comments saying, "Oh man, he's just so skilled," or "He's just so powerful." It was 100% due to the massive tire clearance that the Stigmata has, and it had honestly nothing to do with skill or power. Being able to ride through that mud, you could put out 1,000 watts through the whole mud section, but if you didn't have the tire clearance, then your bike was just going to snap in half and you weren't going anywhere.
Yeah, it's clay. If you didn't grow up in the Midwest, what the mud that we're talking about is basically clay. It weighs a lot, it packs up, and it's very hard to get off your bike once it's on there. So just to go in a slightly different direction, this is a really tactical question, but again, I think there are a lot of people out there, amateurs in particular. You guys are, Drew, it sounds like you didn't race a ton this year, but you've traveled a lot to race. Dillman, you're doing this constantly. Drew, when you're in the Lifetime Series next year, you're going to just be jet setting on the, you're going to be on that private plane every weekend, popping into these races. But all the logistics and ops stuff that you have to manage to show up somewhere with functioning equipment that has all the special stuff to do the thing, plus all of your nutrition, it's a lot to manage. And then you're in a new location, you're sleeping in a new space on a different bed with different pillows. And on race day, you also have to balance hydration, caffeine, and the fact that you're not going to be able to stop for like 5 to 8 hours, basically, if you want to be competitive in a race. So I think on that final point, how do you guys manage that balance of like caffeination, hydration, and the need to just like, you can't get off your bike? I don't know if you guys can pee on your bike while riding in a gravel race.
How do you pee off the bike? That's what I'm hearing.
No. Do you guys, are you a peer off the bike during the race?
I just not raced that many long races, and I had to pee so bad, and I had never done it. I think I had tried to do it, maybe had done it once, and I'm sitting at the back. Of course, the official car is right behind me, so I'm like, I don't know if it was because I didn't know how to, or because I was just a nervous peer, and I knew they were watching me. But I sat back there for literally like 30 or 40 minutes of the amateur road race trying to pee. I had teammates coming back there. I watched Tanner Ward, another road racer. I think I watched him come back and pee twice in the time that I was trying to just pee once. And after that, and I never did, I just had to like suck it up and hold it. And, which probably affected the race. I don't know. And then after that, I was like, I got to learn how to pee off the bike. So all winter, I'm going to make a YouTube video about this, of like how to pee off the bike. It'll be PG. It won't be it won't be in like the classified section or whatever.
Yeah. Well, then YouTube wouldn't even allow you to put it up there. So
yeah, it won't be explicit, but I've thought about this a lot, and there's a series of steps that you can take to get better at peeing off the bike. And yeah, at some point you got to just do it. And, to figure out like
you're gonna leave us on a cliffhanger.
Yeah, pretty much. But I can do it.
Well, I mean,
I peed off the bike at BWR Kansas when me and Daxton came out of the middle wooded section about a minute ahead of everybody behind us. Because the wind was so bad, we're like, we're not going to try to. The two of us are not going to make it to the finish. So we were like, how about on the next downhill we pee and then they catch us? And we were like, yeah, that's smart. So we both peed and then they caught up to us, and that was our advantage.
Yeah. Okay. So you have a strategy at this point. I mean, it also, for me, it impacts clothing selection going into the race, because I find I'm not an on-bike peer. My current strategy is just I slightly underhydrate so that I can have the appropriate level of caffeine and then not need to go to the bathroom during the race, which I think is definitely has to be suboptimal from a performance perspective, because if you're dehydrated at the outset, you're just not going to put out as many watts, I don't think. But I also thought about going into BWR Kansas. I felt that a skin suit or speed suit would have been the ideal thing to wear from an aero perspective. But I also thought, man, if I end up having to pee off the bike or even get off the bike to pee, I just find it takes more time to do that versus bibs in a jersey.
I've never raced a long race. I always just race bibs in a jersey.
You need to get a skin suit that is easy to pee with. Like, for example,
those like summer. I think they're called summer suits, but it's basically basically bibs with a jersey attached to it. So it feels like a bit. Yeah, there you go. Speed suit.
Like my Rule 28 road skin suit, like they call it the road suit, is very easy to pee out of, actually.
Yeah, but Dillman just pees his chamois, so like that's that strategy. That's strategy.
That's the triathlon move.
If you're a triathlete, peeing off the bike for me is I have not mastered peeing while riding.
You have to practice, dude.
Fortunately, I usually don't have to pee during a gravel race. If it's over 70 degrees, I will not have to pee one time during the whole race. The race could be 10 hours. I won't have to pee. The only time I have to pee during a gravel race is if it's cold. So probably if it's under 70, I might have to pee. If it's under 60 degrees, I'm definitely having to pee. And for example, at Leadville this year, it was quite cold. I think it was 40 degrees for most of the race, and then it was 50, and then maybe towards the end it hit 60. But we're talking about really cold temperatures, and I probably peed 7 times during Leadville. I didn't stop, and I just peed my chamois 7 times during Leadville, and it smelled so bad after the race.
I can't believe you admit that. It's one thing if I make fun of you for doing it, but for you actually saying that is like a whole other.
If I honestly, even if I was capable of peeing off the bike and I had to stop pedaling and pee off the bike 7 times during Leadville, I probably would have lost like 2 or 3 minutes, and that would have been
I was just about to say, this is how committed Dylan is to FKT, like fastest time that he could possibly, not FKT, but like FDT, the fastest Dylan time. The fastest Dylan time means he's not even peeing off the bike, because that requires not being able to pedal. He's thinking, I need to keep pedaling and pee at the same time, or whatever's the fastest. That's how committed he is to speed.
Yeah. My stopping time at Leadville this year was 0.
Nice.
That's phenomenal. Well, you heard it here first, folks. Going back to just the travel aspect of these races, what do you all do just to make sure you get a good night's sleep? Because you are in a lot of different locations, different beds. You don't know what's going to be in the spot when you get there. Do you sleep easily everywhere, or do you have anything specific you do so you can get a good night's sleep?
I always like to read. You can always take a book with you. I feel like that always winds me down no matter what, to pull out a book and read. And like, if you're there for a big race, that takes your mind off of things too, because it's very easy to just sit there and just let your mind kind of wander, and you end up kind of down this rabbit hole of like thinking about the race, and then you're probably keeping yourself awake. So I always bring a book and read. I like what Dylan does. This isn't related to sleep, but Dylan will drive to like every race. It doesn't matter like how far the race is. He'll take his van. And I think the more that I think about it, and I've flown to a few races this year, is that taking your own van means you can bring as much of your own crap as you want to bring. And it's like you're bringing a part of your home with you, because it's like something that you're familiar with, your car and everything that's in it. And the more I think about the lifetime stuff next year, I'm like, yeah, I'm leaning towards figuring out ways to drive to more of the races. If it means like leaving earlier and bringing the family with, then, that's a little bit harder for me to do, but that would make it a lot more, it seems like that would make it a lot more like sustainable. And when you're there, you feel a lot more prepared. Like when you fly in, I did this twice this year at Gravel Nats and at BWR Utah. I flew in the day before the race. On the way to pick up my number, like straight from the airport, I'd stop and build my bike on the side of the road, and then ride a part of the course, like 10 or 15 miles of the course, go pick up my number, get dinner, sleep, race, fly home the very next day. I'm like, you're talking like less than 48 hours from door to door, and I'm racing somewhere in the middle of there. And that was good, because it gets me, like, a lot of the decision making I have is like, I'm trying to maximize the amount of time I'm home and not away from home. And so that makes sense for me, because I don't want to spend a week at these races. I want to spend 2 days so that I can spend a week at home with my wife and my daughter, so I think maybe that means they're going to come to more races with me next year. So that's kind of the goal, is that our life will be in a point where they'll be able to just come with me. Yeah.
And Dylan, you've got the van, but what else do you do once you get to a location to ensure that you're feeling comfortable, you get a good night's sleep?
This is what I say a lot when people ask me about what to do about pre-race nerves. And this is not very helpful advice, but this is true for me, at least, is that the more bike racing that you do, the more that you get used to pre-race nerves or the pre-night sleep before a race, it really doesn't. It becomes a non-issue at a certain point. And I think that also too has to do with how much bike racing you're doing in a year. I mean, sometimes I do get nervous for the first race of the year because I haven't done it in 6 months. But if we're at the third race of the year, fourth race of the year, I'm not very nervous, and I'm not having any trouble sleeping. And there's not necessarily tricks that I'm doing to be comfortable and sleep better. It's just that, I mean, that's part of my life now. You don't get nervous for something that you do on a weekly basis.
One thing that I think, Dylan,
Yeah,
this is
totally.
really cool. Coney Looser came from Switzerland, and did the Lifetime series. Didn't know a single person, and I think at Unbound. So he was coming over here. He'd fly over, do the race, fly home, and he's basically like here by himself. And this weekend at Big Sugar, all of us were in the same house. It was like Dylan and me and Adam Roberge and Coney and Jack Odron. Like a whole group of us were all in the same house. And I say all that to say, like, Dylan like befriended Coney or vice versa. I don't know. They became friends at Unbound, and then it seemed like Coney didn't have anybody to hang out with, and now he's like in with a group. And what I'm saying is, it's these races, like, you can go and focus on the race and get in and get out, but it's going to be a much more enjoyable experience if you can do it with other people. And I thought it was really cool when Coney told me that, like, Dylan and Nina were like, "You're coming to these races by yourself?" They just immediately like invited them into their group. Like no similar sponsors, nothing. But this guy's like coming all the way from Switzerland. And I was like, man, that's pretty cool. Like, and it seemed like he was having a lot of fun. Like, I liked hanging out with him a lot. I hope that he does the series again next year so that I can race him and hang out with him more. And I had just met him this weekend. But yeah, I would say that, like, but basically what I'm saying is stay with friends, because it's going to be a lot more enjoyable.
Yeah, and unlike you, Drew, I'm not a get in, get out of a race type person. I like showing up early, being prepared. Sometimes I even take my time leaving. Like, you left first thing in the morning because you had your family to get back to, but Nina and I probably didn't leave Bentonville until noon or 1 p.m. Like, we went over to the Outer Bike demo to just say hi to one of Nina's sponsors, and then we got lunch, and then we left. Like, we took our time.
Yeah, if the family comes, I would absolutely be more aligned with that. But when my kid goes to bed at 8:30, I'm trying to get home before 8:30. You know what I mean? To get into some eggs. Yeah. But so I'm like, I'm always split. I'm like, I want to get there and do the pre-ride and do all that, but the more I do that, the less I'm at home with them. So if they can come with, it's like the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
Yeah, completely. And I think that's another thing that's interesting for just amateurs out there that are, I mean, Dylan, you're doing it probably every weekend. For the average amateur, whatever, they're doing this like 1 or 2 times a year. So it's very challenging for it to become a routine thing where, they're like flying across the country, they're packing a bike, they've got to do all the logistics. But at the same time, you're right, as is the case with anything in life, the more reps you have of it, the more exposure you have, the greater your stress inoculation. And to your point, Drew, for example, for me at BWR Kansas, I made this an opportunity to bring together a bunch of people I hadn't seen since before the pandemic. And I had a couple of past podcast guests who race came to do the event. Spencer from Beyond the Peloton. We've done probably 80 plus episodes together at this point, but we'd never met in real life. So, like all these people, and it was incredible, man. Like, it was so fun to get to hang out with these amazing people who I've become good friends with, but who I'd never met in real life. And then my buddy Eric Matthews came up from Costa Rica, and I hadn't seen him since before the pandemic either. So it was just an incredible experience. And now as I think about what does this look like for me and how does it fit into my life going forward, because I had really stepped back from all of this since the birth of my son more than 7 years ago, just to focus on family and be a bit less selfish with my time. But going forward, I'm like, I don't know, maybe this is the thing that I get together and do with my friends the way some people I know might like go on a golf trip. I'm going to go do some horrible endurance event, get together with my buddies, because it's really fun to do hard things with people you care about. It's a lot of fun, as you guys know. One other area I wanted to explore here, and again, I'm gonna get some people from Lifetime on to talk about this. But as I've watched what they've done in the past 2 years, which is just take this mishmash of bucket list events that on their own had a big following, like Leadville, that always had maxed out reg every year. They rolled up all of these events, and some of them I don't think until now were really highly desirable to participate in for amateurs. But what they've done is they have this application process for professional athletes to get into the series. The athletes that they're selecting are world-class athletes, and they also, like you guys, most of them make content about the experience. So they're doing free content marketing for the event that they're applying to get in, because they need that exposure and those results to support their competitive careers. And that in turn, once all this content gets out there, in addition to what Lifetime is doing, puts these events and these experiences in front of a much larger audience. And then amateurs really want to go do the events, and then the events start to sell out. So Lifetime has created this incredible marketing flywheel where they have professional athletes having to apply to get into the event. It's highly desirable. And then amateurs want to go do the events because they're seeing all the content about them, which it's just like kind of an incredible system. Like they've gotten someone else to paint the fence for them, it seems like. So what does it feel like to be in that ecosystem? And
well, I think to piggyback on your point that you're just making, I want to say that Lifetime, they got some crap for this when they first announced the series, making it exclusive and having it only be 30 men and 30 women, and having this application process. And a lot of people were saying, why are you doing that? Just let anybody in who wants to be in the series. I think that was actually genius for them. And the reason for that is because when you make it exclusive and you have to be at a certain level to even be competing, then those riders that make it in are committed to the series. That is what they're focusing on during the season. I mean, just to give you an example, Eric Bruner this year didn't have a great Lifetime Grand Prix. Do you think he would have stuck around till Big Sugar if he wasn't in the series and fully committed? Like, no, he probably would have pulled out after Leadville or something. And that's usually
there's a big C1 cross race in Cincinnati that we all had to miss this weekend to go do Big Sugar.
Exactly my point. And that's what happens with a lot of series. At the beginning of the year, there are a bunch of pros that are excited about the series, and then they get halfway through and they're like, I'm not doing as well in it as I would like to do, so I'm just going to focus on something else. I think that was absolutely genius for Lifetime to think of that. A lot of people are still upset that there's even an application process, and we can go back and forth about whether that's a good thing to do in gravel racing or not, but I think from a marketing perspective, it was pretty smart.
I love the application process as long as they let me in. If they don't let me in, I hate it.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that's part of what I love about what you guys do with your content and what you're doing as athletes, and why I've had you on the podcast separately, and why I wanted to have you back is I think that you're a great example of how this sport grows and how you get people interested in what's happening in cycling. You have to have storylines. It's almost like professional wrestling, which, whatever you think of it, professional wrestling is like the apex of sports entertainment. And you have heels and you have heroes. You have very high tension, dramatic storylines. And, on a really minor level, I know that it's a bit of a joke, but kind of the running thing between you two this season about, Drew's aspirations to become a lifetime athlete.
I am the cream of the crop. The cream of the crop.
Oh, yeah. But but there's that aspect of it where, you know, a little bit of smack talking among friends in a public forum, like it becomes quite interesting. And that's really what professional cycling has been.
Is it true though?
I don't know, Dylan.
I mean, I think like we just proved that all the smack talk you did all year was not true when I came ahead of you at Big Sugar.
Yeah, you did beat me. Fair and square, you beat me.
You were saying
like next year, man. Next year.
You know, like the smack talk is good, but you were saying you were going to win Big Sugar, and 24th place is quite a long way off of the win.
Yeah. That was a joke, but beating you was absolutely not a joke.
Okay.
I still think I could have beat you.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you hadn't had that crash, it would have been a lot closer. I'll give you that.
That's Dylan's way of saying he knows I would have beaten him too. He texted me the day that I got third at BWR Kansas. My wife texted me congrats, and Dylan texted me, I'm a little more scared now.
It was an impressive result. I was there to see it. I mean, you were not far behind the winner, who was the winner.
Absolutely. Yep. That's what I keep trying to tell these guys. The same first and second place were the same at both races. So it's only mathematically correct to think that third place would have probably been the same too.
It was a big result. I mean, you had talked a lot of smack the entire year, and it kind of felt like one of those moments where you pointed at the fence and you'd smack the ball pretty well. And you were looking good going into the next race. But yeah, I mean, I think kind of going back to my superordinate point here, if you don't know the people who are in a sport, if you don't know their stories, if you don't know what's going on behind the scenes, it's just not that interesting. And, you know, I think part of the genius of what Lifetime has done, we just touched on this, is they brought in all these athletes who are out there actively telling their own stories, making their own content, taking people inside the races. And would it be way cooler if this was happening, if you guys were doing all of this, and also, you know, Lifetime had their YouTube series last year? Would it be awesome if Lifetime were doing something more than that series plus, I don't know what their version of Instagram stories is. I know that they did it during Big Sugar. It does feel a little bit, I would like something more than that as a fan, besides going and refreshing stories 60 times during the day and having my family ask me what I'm doing when a major gravel race is going on. Because honestly, like at my house, you know, whether it's the World Cup cyclocross series in Europe, some of the C1s in the US, the classics, the Tour, the Vuelta, like it's always on in my house. And my kids, you know, they've gotten into professional cycling. Mm-hmm. They know who all the athletes are, but not as well as I personally know what's going on within the world of gravel because of everything that's on Instagram and all these other places. So it'd be cool to foreground those stories more and just like tell more of the story of like what's going on within the race, what's going on in the background. I think it's highly relatable because amateur athletes can go out and participate in the same events. And you can't say that of, I mean, I love the Tour de France, but it's slightly different in that regard. It's not highly relatable for somebody who just goes out and rides a bike typically. Although, as we all know, like there are many like Cat 4s who think they could win the Tour de France based on their Training Peaks files.
Well, what I will say is that although it wasn't live coverage, the coverage that the Grand Prix had after both Leadville and after Big Sugar with the videos that they made, I think they put those out within a day or two. It was very quick turnaround. And anybody who knows anything about video editing should be really impressed by how quick that Big Sugar video was like 40 minutes long, and it took a lot of editing to do. So whoever was working on that was working on it from the minute the race ended, probably until they put it out. And again, it's not live coverage, but it was about as good a coverage of a US gravel race as you're going to see. And I was very impressed by it. And if that's the new standard and they start doing that for every single Grand Prix race and they put those things on YouTube and they start getting 100,000 plus views per video, a lot of like US gravel racers are going to start to become more household names, at least, you know, amongst US cycling fans.
Yeah, that's awesome. You know, we interviewed Richard Pluga, the CEO of the Jumbo Visma team, on Beyond the Peloton recently, and there are a lot of aspects of that conversation I found to be really interesting. But something that really struck me was they actually regard the American market as being extremely important, which honestly was non-obvious to me based on some of their social media and marketing things that happened this fall and how they handled everything at the Vuelta. But you know, it's clear. I think that there's going to be some kind of convergence of what's happening with like the creator athlete thing that's going on in gravel and what's going on in the world tour, coupled with
fleets.
In Flua fleets.
That's the first time I'm hearing that. Did you make that up?
Yeah, fleets. You're an influencer and you're an athlete in fleet. Yeah.
It really has a ring to it, Drew. We'll attribute that to you. So looking at 2024, if you could rewrite the book of gravel, what would you like to see new or different from a course point of view, sporting point of view, how competition is organized?
Some of the changes that Lifetime is already making is changes that I wanted to see. And it's changes that people who are heavy spear to gravel type people don't like. But I'm talking about separating the pro field from the amateur field, separating the men's and the women's races. Any professional woman gravel racer that you talk to wants the women and the men to be separated. They don't want to race with the men. It's just much more aggressive, and basically the tactic for them, the only tactic for them is just get with a fast group of men, which does not make for super exciting racing for the women's field. I think them doing that, I know that there are spirit of gravel people out there that are really upset about that. They want to see gravel stay just a big old mass start. I think there's a certain point where that no longer makes sense, and I think we've reached that point. So one of the changes that I would personally make is a change that's already being made.
No races above 6,000 feet.
I don't.
That's what I would say.
For an East Coaster, I actually don't mind the altitude, and maybe
because you spent 2 months in Colorado acclimating, dude. I cannot do that.
Here's my counter argument to that. Somebody like Kerry Warner also spent over a month acclimating for Leadville and had a bad race. I think I'm just for somebody who grew up at low altitude, I think I'm genetically predetermined to not absolutely suck when I go to altitude like so many East Coasters do.
The Kerry Warner example is even worse because he did try to go for a month and he still sucked.
That's why I use that example.
That's why I'm saying they should take him out, because even if I were to go and acclimate, there's a 50% chance that I still suck.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. That if I got into the series, that would be the hardest part of pulling together a full season, would be doing well at those races. And you have to do at least one. And if you want to be considered like in the overall, like in the money, you have to do well at least one of them, because there's 7 races and 3 of them are at high altitude. So like,
Drew, the other thing is that if you get in, you're going to have to get a mountain bike, and you're probably going to have to practice riding that thing.
Bro, I grew up riding mountain bikes. I can ride a mountain bike. Who was the king? Tell me, Dillman, who was the king of the dirt at BWR Kansas 2 weeks ago?
But that's
was it any of the mountain bikers?
That's clearly from your cyclocross skills, though.
Does it not transfer? I think I can handle a bike, dude.
I don't know, man. I don't know. I will say that back in college, you were quite a bit faster at mountain biking than me, but I don't think you've ridden your mountain bike since then.
Hey, it's like riding a bike, dude. It doesn't go away.
Right.
Well, I do think with altitude, it's worth looking back at what happened with the Norba series in the U.S. And I actually think that over-rotating on having races at high altitude is part of what really killed cross-country mountain biking in the United States in the mid to late 90s, why it went to Europe. And then, I mean, it's coming back now because of NICA. But by basing, Norba based most of their national series around high altitude locations at ski resorts. That's from a participant point of view, that's not where the vast majority of people are able to mountain bike, because not everyone in the United States lives at a high altitude location with alpine trails. And if you wanted to be competitive in the Norba series, you basically had to be altitude acclimated year round. And then that did not transpose into the World Cup circuit, which happened in, the Grundig circuit was happening in Europe in more or less city center short loops in places like Madrid. And then the US was pretty much out of the hunt for 20 plus years. So, but on the other hand, this is, I think, all about commercial considerations for Lifetime and them wanting to max out registration and like their bucket list events, which I think they're doing a great job of. So from a business point of view, I think it makes a ton of sense for them. For you professional athletes, like, you're right, Drew, like if you want to be competitive, you're probably going to have to go be in Colorado for 2 months.
I hate who wants to spend that much time in Colorado? I mean, come on.
Colorado is awesome. I love spending time in Colorado.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. Well, guys, thanks so much for your time. It was awesome to have you here today to chop it up, hear a bit more about the rivalry. And if I get these,
you have to get them in before November the 7th, because that's when they release so you have to be able to get them on before then so that you can tell them to let me in.
Yeah, we'll see. Maybe we'll be back for like a super episode. We'll see. Until then.